Hey there, everybody. For part 2 here of file I/O operations, we're going to read from files. That's this bottom most replit link here. Let's just refresh this page and get a clean output. So a couple of things to remember. Again, every time we are working with file operations, line number 2, import java.io.star. And that's going to bring the whole of the input-output operations library here. 2 is to remember you are working with files. Remember this throws IO exception. Also remember that if you have code intelligence enabled, that is going to show up right away when you say throws IO. IO exception is going to be the very first thing that shows up there. Remember also, right here on line 16, this is from the previous example, file is our variable type. Lowercase f for file is our variable name. New file called file name. That all happens right here. That is setting up the name for our file. Now, you'll notice over here it's names.txt. And we're going to see why that's important in just a moment. But we'll look here at the rest of the code block just so we can expect what the output is going to be over in our output window over here. Now we've got a simple while loop, and inside of that while loop, the condition that we are checking for Boolean true or false is input file dot has next. So what we're saying is input file is the name of the file that we are reading in from, right? That's right here. That's the name of the file we're reading. You'll remember when we had an out stream for a file, we called it output file. When we have an in stream for a file here, that's we're reading from it, we're going to call it input file. So as long as our file has a next line, keep running through here. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign the next line as it's read from our file into a string called friend name, and then we're going to print that string to the screen, and that's it. So one more time, we're going to create, or we're going to look for a file called input file. We are going to loop through that file as long as we have data to loop through. We're going to temporarily store that next most immediate line from our file into friend name, and then we're simply going to print friend name to our output window over here. Now, I'm just going to run this, and I'm going to let you know I'm going to make a mistake here first and foremost. During class, we talked about, and with the output file, we talked about having to name the file with the file extension. If I simply here enter the file name, if I just say names without the extension, you're going to see exception thread or exception in thread main. So essentially what this says is no such file or directory exists, and it tells us the location of where I have made Java angry here. Now, before I continue, let's just do this. As a thought experiment, I'm going to take the names that are stored in names.txt, and I'm just going to copy them. And here under files, I'm going to add a new file, and I'm going to call it names, but without an extension. You'll notice it didn't balk at me, right? I've got names.txt. It's not angry with me. I'm going to paste the content from names.txt into the unfile typed file called names. Now I'm just going to run it one more time without changing anything of the way that it was that I did the input previously. When asked, I'm going to enter names, no file extension, for my file name. And you'll notice that this time it went through and it actually did exactly what we requested. It printed the names from the next lines of our file, and it stopped as soon as there was no more lines from the file to retrieve. Now, here's the problem. Names.what? It doesn't have an extension, right? So if I was to download this, I would actually get a file called names.file, and that would not be openable by most of the programs that I have, right? So I'd have to open that up in brackets. I would have to open that up in Sublime. I would have to open that up in Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio or Xcode or other. The whole point of having Java is I can go from one system to another system to another system to another system, and those can be Mac, Windows, Linux. I can have specialized server OSs. I can have, Android OSs. I can have web-based architectures on an iPad someplace. We want interoperability for everything here. If instead of this .file, which is not going to be good for us, so I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to run it again. Instead of that, I'm going to specify names.txt. Names.txt. You'll notice it's actually reading here from names.txt. I can prove it to you. I'm going to add 2 spaces there, and I'm going to put Dr. Teeth here. So line number 6 is empty, and actually I'm going to put an empty line on line number 8, and we're going to run it again. So names.txt, and it did exactly what I expected, right? It's got that line of empty, or it's got the empty line of text in between the two of them there. This is far better than just having names, no extension, because as I pass my data that I've collected here inside of my Java application, as I pass that data from one architecture to another architecture to another architecture, from Mac to Windows to Android to a server OS, as I go from front-end user interaction to back-end server-side interactions, as I take these names, I'm not saying like Bert, Ernie, and Elmo are great names for anything, but as I take the data that I would have put into here and I pass that along to other applications, those applications are going to need to look at the file type that you see here, that .txt. Just remember to do that when you say enter a file name. Remind the user, enter a file name with a .txt extension, such as file.txt or something like that. And when you do that, you'll kind of satisfy both ends there of the spectrum. You'll satisfy the internal needs of Java and the internal needs of you as a data engineer, and you're going to satisfy the external needs of your client so that they know names.txt as opposed to just names. So that is reading from a file. You don't need the print writer object like you did when we were writing to a file. We simply need a file that we can open. And as long as we have a file that we can open, remember the shorthand for it, or our variable that we assign that to, is input file. As long as we have that file, we can do has next, and that's actually going to read an entire line of text from your output or your previously outputted file.